In the age when gods still walked among mortals, and the fates of kingdoms were whispered through the veil of Olympus, there stood a shining city on the western shores of Asia, a city built by the hands of the gods and fortified by pride and prophecy. Ilion, they called it Troy to the west, and its golden towers reached up like the spears of immortals. But even the strongest walls cannot resist the pull of fate. The tale begins not in Troy, but in the heavens at a wedding feast. Thetis, a sea nymph of radiant beauty, was to be wed to Peleus, a mortal favored by the gods. All Olympus gathered, all but one. Eris, goddess of strife, was spurned from the celebration. Angered and vengeful, she cast a golden apple into the feast, inscribed with a single, damning phrase to the fairest. Hera, queen of the gods, Athena, goddess of wisdom, and Aphrodite, goddess of love, each reached for the prize. To resolve their quarrel, they turned to a mortal shepherd, a prince in exile, who tended his flocks on the slopes of Mount Ida. Paris of Troy, unknown to his people, was chosen to judge. Each goddess offered him a bribe. Hera promised dominion over all lands. Athena offered the wisdom of all men and the might of war. But Aphrodite whispered of a woman, the fairest who ever lived, whose name would one day drown nations in blood. Helen of Sparta. Paris chose love, and by his choice, doomed a generation. Soon after, Paris sailed across the wine-dark seas and entered the halls of Menelaus, king of Sparta. There, he beheld Helen, and under the spell of Aphrodite's favor, stole her away. Some say she went willingly. Others claim she was taken. But none could deny the fury that followed. Menelaus, shamed and betrayed, called upon his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, whose ambition burned hotter than the forge of Hephaestus. Under a blood-red banner, they summoned the might of all Achaea, Odysseus of Ithaca, wise and wily, Achilles of Phthia, son of a goddess and doomed to die young, Ajax the Greater, unyielding as stone, Diomedes, the lion-hearted, and Nestor, ancient and wise. 1,000 ships blackened the harbor of Aulis, and the greatest army the world had ever seen sailed for Troy, but the gods are cruel patrons. Before their voyage, the wind ceased. The sea lay flat and unmoving, as if mourning what was to come. Calchas, the seer, spoke of Artemis's wrath, and Agamemnon, to appease the goddess, offered a terrible sacrifice, his own daughter, Iphigenia. Her blood turned the tides, and the fleet moved on. For 9 long years, the Achaeans laid siege to Troy. Battles surged outside the city walls, and champions fell one by one. Yet the walls of Ilion stood, unbroken. Inside, King Priam ruled with sorrow in his eyes. Hector, his eldest son, bore the hopes of the city on his shoulders. Noble and just, he fought not for pride, but to protect the lives of the innocent. Beside him stood Paris, now matured into a deadly archer, and Aeneas, who carried the bloodline of Troy's ancient founders. But pride breeds discord. Achilles, greatest of the Achaeans, clashed with Agamemnon over a slave girl, Briseis. Enraged, Achilles withdrew from the war, and the Trojans surged forward, pushing the Greeks back to their ships. Only when Patroclus, beloved companion of Achilles, donned his armor and fell at Hector's spear, did the warrior return. In wrath and anguish, he hunted Hector, and beneath the walls of Troy, he slew the prince and dragged his body in dust and blood. Priam, in courage unmatched, walked alone into the Achaean camp and knelt before the man who killed his son. He kissed the hands that had ended his bloodline. Achilles, moved by the old king's grief, wept. For a moment, humanity returned, but the war was not yet over. It would be Odysseus who conceived the trick that would end it all. A hollow horse, left as a gift at Troy's gates, filled with armed men. The Trojans, believing the war was ended, brought the horse inside the city. That night, as celebrations rang through the streets, fire and sword followed. The Greeks emerged, opened the gates, and the city burned. Priam was cut down at his altar. Hector's infant son was hurled from the walls. Cassandra, cursed prophetess, screamed of the doom no one would hear. And as Troy collapsed in a flame, Aeneas gathered the remnants of his people and fled, for fate had decreed he would found a new empire across the sea. Thus fell Ilion, not by strength but by cunning and pride. And so this tale, born of a single apple, a shepherd's choice, and the folly of kings, echoes still through the ages, as all great tragedies do. For in every war, in every nation torn asunder, there lies the shadow of Troy. From ashes, a new flame shall rise when the gods turn their backs, and the screams of Ilion echoed across the burning walls. A few souls fled into the night. Among them was Aeneas, son of Anchises and the goddess Aphrodite. Though Troy had crumbled, its bloodline, its spirit had not yet perished. Clad in soot and grief, Aeneas emerged from the shadows of his father's garden, bearing Anchises on his back, the old man, too frail to walk. By his side was his young son Ascanius, wide-eyed and silent, and behind them walked the shattered remnants of Trojan nobility, servants, guards, mothers with babes swaddled in rags, all lit by the glow of their dying homeland. Above them, the gods watched in silence, their judgment already past. They will now set upon a new path. Aeneas did not weep. His heart was stone, carved by the loss of his wife Creusa, whose hand had slipped from his in the chaos of their escape. He searched the ruins for her, calling her name into the smoke, but found only her shade, flickering at the edge of firelight. "Go," she said, her voice thin as wind. "You are meant to found a city greater than Troy. My fate lies in ashes. Yours lies beyond the sea." And so he did not look back. For months they wandered the coasts of Thrace and the isles of the Aegean, seeking shelter, facing betrayal and strange omens. In Delos, they knelt before the oracle of Apollo, and the god spoke through a trembling priest. "Seek the land of your forefathers across the sea. There destiny awaits." The Trojans sailed for Crete, believing it the place of their ancestors, but famine and plague struck them like divine punishment. The earth cracked, serpents slithered from the fields, and the sky wept blood. Aeneas dreamed of the Penates, the household gods of Troy, whispering from the ruins of their temple. "Not here," they said, "farther west, to Hesperia, to Italy." Italy, a name like a prophecy. They set sail again, battered and worn. At Strophades, harpies, cursed women with wings of ash, attacked their camp and shrieked, "You will found your city, but only after hunger drives you to eat your very tables." The omen chilled them, but Aeneas pressed on to Actium. They rested, offering games to the gods, remembering Troy's glory in competitions of strength and speed. In Bethrodum, they met Helenus, son of Priam and a prophet himself, who had become a king in exile. He warned Aeneas, "Beware the coasts of Sicily, and steer clear of the eastern shore. There lies Scylla, the monster of the straits, and Charybdis, the maw that swallows the sea. But know this, you are chosen. Jupiter himself wills your destiny." With guidance, they sailed again, losing ships to storms, to rocks, to silence. In Sicily, Aeneas buried his father. Anchises had lived to see their path, but not its end. The funeral pyre burned for 3 days, and the mourners carved his name into a stone at Cape Lilybaeum. Aeneas built a shrine, swearing an oath to reach the promised land for his father's sake. But fate had one final trial to cast. Juno, queen of the gods, still burned with hatred for Troy. For she knew, as the fates had whispered, that a descendant of Aeneas would one day destroy her beloved city of Carthage. And so, she summoned Aeolus, keeper of the winds, and begged him to release a tempest upon the Trojans. The skies blackened. Thunder cracked like war drums. Waves rose like walls. The ships scattered. Aeneas's fleet was dashed upon the shores of North Africa. Half drowned and starving, they crawled onto foreign sands. There, beyond the dunes, a city rose in marble and firelight. Carthage, young, proud, prosperous. Its queen was Dido, a widow whose husband had been murdered by treachery and who had sworn never to love again. Yet when she met Aeneas, fate twisted once more. Venus, Aeneas's divine mother, saw an opportunity. With Cupid's arrow, she stoked Dido's heart, and the queen, once cold and steeled by loss, found herself drawn to the Trojan prince. She offered him refuge, wealth, and even her hand. For a season, Aeneas stayed. He walked Carthage's blooming courtyards, spoke of Troy by starlight, and let his sword rest. Dido believed he might stay forever, but destiny is a flame that cannot be extinguished. Mercury descended from Olympus, wings glinting with divine gold. He spoke to Aeneas as he slept. "Leave this place. You are not born for love, but for empire. Your fate lies in the west. Go now, or betray everything." Torn by duty and sorrow, Aeneas stole away in the night. Dido watched his sails vanish over the horizon. She climbed to the highest pyre and threw herself into the fire, cursing his name with her last breath. The smoke of her death mingled with the stars, and her soul would become the wrath of Carthage for generations to come. Aeneas, heavy with guilt and fate, sailed once more. In Cumae, on Italy's coast, he sought the Sibyl, a prophetess who could guide him to the underworld. For before founding a new city, he had to speak with the dead. In a cavern deep within the earth, guided by a golden bough, he walked the halls of Hades. There he saw lost friends, fallen Trojans, and the tormented spirits of heroes who had never found peace. In the Elysian fields, he found Anchises once more, strong, radiant, proud. His father spoke of the future. "From your line shall rise Romulus, founder of Rome. Through him, a line of kings. Through them, Augustus, the man who will bring peace to a world at war. This is your legacy." And so, Aeneas returned to the living world, but Italy was not empty. Latium was ruled by King Latinus, whose daughter, Lavinia, was promised to a local prince named Turnus. When Latinus offered Lavinia's hand to Aeneas, war ignited once more. Turnus, proud and fearless, called upon the tribes of Italy to resist the Trojan invaders. The final war was long and bitter. Rivers ran red, forests burned, pacts were made and broken. Yet Aeneas did not waver in single combat. He met Turnus beneath the boughs of an ancient oak. Steel clashed, earth shook, and when Turnus lay defeated, begging for mercy, Aeneas saw the sword belt of Pallas, a young Trojan boy Turnus had slain, fastened at his enemy's waist. His rage rose, and he drove his blade into Turnus's heart. With that act, the war ended. But peace is born of pain. Aeneas would marry Lavinia and found a new city, Lavinium. His son, Ascanius, would later found Alba Longa, and centuries hence, twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, would rise from this bloodline to found Rome itself. Thus, from the ruins of Troy, a new world was born. And so the tale of Aeneas ends not in fire, but in legacy, a legacy shaped by gods, cursed by wrath, but destined to outlast even Olympus, from prophecy to power. The founding of Rome in the years after the death of Aeneas. His legacy took root in the soil of Latium. Lavinium grew, nourished by the memory of Troy and the blood of war. His son, Ascanius, also called Iulus, ruled with wisdom, founding the city of Alba Longa on the slopes of the Alban Hills, where silver mist curled around sacred groves and wolves howled beneath moonlight. Generations passed. Kings rose and fell, some noble and some cruel, but all bore the blood of Aeneas. The whisper of gods in their veins, it was under the reign of Numitor, the 12th king of Alba Longa, that destiny stirred once more. Numitor was a just man, beloved by his people, but envied by his brother Amulius. Driven by ambition and shadowed by omens, Amulius overthrew his brother, seized the throne, and cast Numitor into exile to ensure that no future heir would rise from Numitor's line. Amulius took his niece, Rhea Silvia, daughter of the rightful king, and forced her into the service of Vesta, goddess of the hearth. Bound by oath, she became a Vestal virgin, condemned to a life without love, without family, without children. But the gods had not forgotten. One night, As stars shimmered like polished bronze across the sky, Rhea Silvia wandered near the banks of the Tiber. There, in a grove sacred to Mars, the god of war himself appeared, wreathed in flame and shadow. Whether it was love, violence, or divine will, none can say, but from that union came twin sons. Rhea Silvia bore them in silence, her face torn between awe and fear. When Amulius learned of their birth, his wrath was boundless. He ordered the infants cast into the Tiber to be drowned and forgotten. Yet the river, swollen with spring rains, did not consume them. Instead, the cradle that held them floated gently down the current, as if guided by an unseen hand. When the waters receded, the cradle came to rest at the base of the Palatine Hill, where a wild fig tree bent over the banks like a guardian. There a she-wolf, fierce, ancient, and sacred to Mars, found the crying infants. With maternal instinct and divine guidance, she suckled the twins, licking their brows clean of river silt, sheltering them in her den among the roots and stones. The twins, Romulus and Remus, thrived under her care. Later, a shepherd named Faustulus found the boys and, marveling at their strength and fire, brought them home to his wife, Acca, who raised them as her oat as they grew. So too did their legend. The boys were swift and clever, leading bands of shepherds and hunters, defending the hills from raiders, stealing from the rich to feed the poor. They wrestled wolves, climbed cliffs, and defied the petty lords who had forgotten justice. Yet neither knew their true origin, until fate revealed it one day. During a festival, Remus was captured by soldiers of Alba Longa and brought before King Amulius. As Romulus gathered allies to rescue him, Faustulus confessed the truth to the young warrior. You are not mere shepherds. You are princes, sons of Mars. The blood of Troy and kings flows in your veins. With this truth burning in his heart, Romulus stormed the city. In a blaze of revolt, he freed Remus, killed Amulius, and restored Numitor to his rightful throne. The people rejoiced, for the tyrant had fallen, and justice had returned to Alba Longa. Yet Romulus and Remus could not stay. The fire within them demanded more. They yearned not for thrones already built, but for the birth of a new city, a city shaped by their own hands, forged by their own vision. They returned to the banks of the Tiber, to the wild lands where they had been saved, and there they vowed to raise a new Troy, a city that would never fall. But even brothers born of the same womb, suckled by the same wolf, are not free from rivalry. Each had his vision. Remus favored the Aventine Hill. Romulus chose the Palatine. They argued. They debated. When no agreement came, they turned to the gods. Both stood upon their chosen hills and watched the skies for omens. Remus saw 6 vultures. Romulus saw 12. Each claimed victory, and tempers flared. In defiance, Romulus began to build a wall around his hill. When Remus mocked him, leaping over the half-built rampart, Romulus struck him down. The earth fell silent. Romulus buried his brother at the foot of the Palatine and named the city Rome. He wept for Remus, but he did not turn back. So perish all who cross my walls, he said, not as a brother, but as a king. Rome rose from stone and blood to fill its ranks. Romulus welcomed exiles, criminals, runaways, men without homes or names. He gave them purpose. He carved laws with his sword and governed with wisdom stolen from the gods. But there were no women, and the city could not grow. Romulus turned to diplomacy. He invited the neighboring Sabines to a festival, and while they feasted, his men took their daughters by force. Outrage followed. War erupted. The Sabines marched upon Rome, led by King Titus Tatius, and battle raged at the foot of the Capitoline Hill. But before blood drowned the earth, the Sabine women, now wives and mothers, ran between the blades. Do not take our husbands from us, they cried. Do not make us widows as you made us brides. The gods listened. The swords fell. Peace was forged. Romulus and Tatius ruled together, uniting Sabine and Roman. Temples were built. The Forum rose. Rome swelled with pride and promise. Years passed. Romulus aged, but his legend only grew. One day, as he addressed the Senate on the field of Mars, a storm of golden light fell from the sky. Thunder cracked, a whirlwind rose, and Romulus vanished. Some say he was taken to Olympus to dwell among the gods as Quirinus. Others say he died, and the tale was myth to veil a murder. But none could deny what followed. The fire he lit did not fade. Rome would endure for centuries, through kings, then consuls, through emperors and tyrants, through triumph and ruin. From the blood of Trojans, from the milk of the wolf, from the murder of a brother, a city was born. And through her, the world would be changed forever, from divine founders to mortal thrones. When Romulus vanished into the stormlight, Rome was left without a king. The people mourned, not just for the man, but for the force he embodied, warlord, lawgiver, demigod. Yet Rome had grown beyond a single leader. The Senate, formed from the noble elders of both Roman and Sabine lineage, took temporary control, ruling jointly in a time known as the interregnum, the between reigns. But a city like Rome could not remain crownless for long. The Senate, after much debate and omen reading, chose a man not of Roman birth but of Sabine blood, Numa Pompilius, a wise and pious man who shunned violence. Where Romulus had built with sword and fire, Numa built with prayer and peace. He brought order to the Roman spirit, founding temples to Janus, Vesta, and Jupiter. He organized the calendar, shaped priesthoods, and taught Rome that there was power not only in conquest, but in ritual, in law, in an invisible pact between mortals and gods. Under Numa's peaceful reign, Rome flourished, but peace breeds complacency, and so the third king was forged in fire, Tullus Hostilius, a warrior by blood and by will. Disdaining Numa's pacifism, Tullus rekindled Rome's hunger for glory. He waged war on Alba Longa, the mother city of Rome itself, and orchestrated one of the most legendary duels in Roman lore. The combat between the Horatii and the Curiatii, three brothers from each side, fighting not for vengeance, but for destiny. Rome emerged victorious. Tullus razed Alba Longa and brought its people into the Roman fold. But his pride angered the gods. When Tullus neglected his sacred duties, lightning struck his palace and burned him to ash. Thus, even kings were not immune to divine judgment. Next came Ancus Marcius, grandson of Numa, who balanced the sword of Tullus with the scepter of peace. He built Rome's first prison, extended its territory, and laid the foundations of the port city Ostia, where the Tiber met the sea. Under his reign, salt and grain flowed into Roman markets, and bridges spanned the sacred river. But it was the fifth king, Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, who would bring ambition unlike any before. A man of Etruscan blood and foreign birth, he gained favor in Rome through cunning and generosity. With the support of the Senate and the people, he claimed the crown. Tarquinius filled the city with wonder. He laid the foundations for the Circus Maximus, where horses thundered and crowds roared. He drained the marshes with the Cloaca Maxima, a marvel of engineering still whispered about today. His reign brought wealth, grandeur, and spectacle. But his hunger drew enemies that he was assassinated by jealous nobles, and power teetered, until his widow, Tanaquil, a woman of rare intellect and prophecy, concealed his death long enough to raise her chosen successor, Servius Tullius. Servius rose from shadow, born not of noble blood, but of a slave woman. Yet he was said to be kissed by flame as a child, a sign from the gods. As king, he reformed Rome more than any before. He divided the people into centuries, a system of wealth and duty. He built the Servian Wall, encircling the 7 hills of Rome. He declared himself a true servant of the city, the first to reign without election by senate or divine omen, but by merit. His vision was bold, a Rome not of tribes or kings, but of a people united under law. But ambition has a price. His daughter, Tullia, married Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, the son of the murdered king. Driven by fury and greed, the couple plotted a bloody path to the throne. In a scene that would stain Roman memory, Tullia drove her chariot over her father's corpse, and Tarquinius seized the crown. He would be Rome's last king. Tarquinius Superbus ruled with iron and blood. He banished opponents, seized lands, and silenced the Senate. He completed the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, Rome's mightiest temple, but his tyranny turned reverence into fear. His name, Superbus, meaning the proud, became a curse, but it was not politics or war that ended the monarchy. It was a crime. His son, Sextus Tarquinius, violated a noblewoman named Lucretia, wife of a Roman noble. When Lucretia took her own life to preserve her honor, her blood became the spark of revolution. Her father, her husband, and a young man named Lucius Junius Brutus swore an oath. By this blood, we will never again suffer a king in Rome. The people rose. Tarquinius was driven into exile. His allies were purged. Brutus, who had once feigned foolishness to survive the king's wrath, now stood as the founder of a new order. In 509 BCE, the Roman Republic was born. Gone were kings, replaced by consuls, elected yearly. Power was divided. Checks and balances forged. A senate to advise. Assemblies to vote. The Romans would never again bow to a crown. At least, not in name. But the shadow of monarchy would linger. The Republic would face internal strife, foreign war, treachery, and greatness. In time, it would become the crucible from which Julius Caesar, Augustus, and the empire itself would rise. But in these early years, as Rome cast off its royal chains, it became something new, not just a city of gods and kings, but of citizens. Rome, the eternal city, had entered a new age. Rome's first century without kings, when the final echo of royal boots faded beyond the gates, and Tarquinius Superbus disappeared into exile. Rome was not yet free. For to banish a king is easy, but to build a republic, a government of laws, not men, is to wage a different kind of war, one against the ever-present pull of power, ambition, and fear. In 509 BCE, the Roman Republic was born, baptized not in peace, but in blood and rebellion. The first consuls, Lucius Junius Brutus and Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus, were chosen to guide the new order. These men held imperium, the right to command, but only for a single year, a radical break from the lifelong reigns of monarchs. Even their lictors, who bore the fasces, bundles of rods symbolizing authority, were no longer to act at a king's whim, but at the will of Rome itself. Yet not all were content. Collatinus, though a hero of the revolution, bore the cursed name of Tarquinius. The people, fearing royal blood might invite tyranny once more, forced him to resign. Such was the ferocity of their vow. Never again a king in Rome. But fate, as always, had more trials to offer. The exiled king, Tarquinius Superbus, sought vengeance. He first turned to the nearby cities of Veii and Tarquinii, hoping to muster an army to reclaim his throne. The result was the Battle of Silva Arcia, a brutal contest between royalists and republicans. Lucius Junius Brutus, founder of the Republic, met the king's son in single combat, and both fell, dying with swords buried in each other's hearts. Brutus, the man who gave Rome freedom, was buried with the mourning of a nation. Though the Republic survived, its enemies multiplied. Tarquinius next appealed to Lars Porsena, the king of Clusium, one of the mightiest cities of Etruria. Porsena, intrigued by the opportunity, marched on Rome with an army vast and disciplined. The Tiber stood as Rome's last defense. Here, in the shadow of the Pons Sublicius, the wooden bridge across the river, Rome found its heroes. Horatius Coccles, a soldier of immense courage, stood at the mouth of the bridge as the Etruscan army advanced. Ordering his comrades to destroy the structure behind him, Horatius faced the enemy alone, holding them off with shield and blade. When the final plank fell, he leapt into the river, swimming back as arrows rained like thunder. Wounded, he emerged to thunderous cries, a symbol of Roman valor, one man against a kingdom. Though Porsena eventually entered Rome, he found not a beaten people, but a nation too stubborn to kneel. Roman resistance was unrelenting. Another youth, Gaius Mucius, crept into the Etruscan camp with the intent to assassinate the king. He killed the wrong man and was captured. When brought before Porsenna, he thrust his right hand into a flame and held it there, unmoving, to show Roman resolve. Impressed, Porsenna released him, and Gaius earned the name Scaevola, lefty. Still another, Cloelia, a Roman girl taken as a hostage, escaped the Etruscans by swimming across the Tiber under a rain of javelins. Her bravery, too, impressed Porsenna, who allowed her to choose other hostages to free with her. In the end, even the enemy admired the indomitable spirit of the Roman people. Rome endured, yet with external threats came internal fracture. The Republic had been founded by patricians, aristocrats, nobles, landowners, who claimed birthright and power. But the plebeians, the commoners, bore the burdens of war, taxation, and injustice without equal voice. A crisis brewed. In 494 BCE, the plebeians marched out of the city to the sacred mount and refused to return. Rome was paralyzed. It was not an enemy army that brought the Republic to its knees, but its own people, demanding justice, equity, and dignity. This moment gave rise to the tribunes of the plebs, elected officials who could veto decisions of the Senate and protect the people. It was a concession that ensured the Republic would be forged not just in marble and iron, but in compromise. Among the patricians, however, not all were blind to virtue. One such man was Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus, a former consul living in humble retirement on a small farm. He was called upon when Rome was besieged by the Equi, a mountain tribe skilled in ambush and brutality. In desperation, the Senate appointed him dictator, a role with absolute power, but only for 6 months. Cincinnatus left his plow, donned the toga of command, and led a rescue of the trapped Roman army. In mere days, he encircled the enemy, forced surrender, and returned victorious. But unlike those who hungered for power, Cincinnatus did what few men in history have done. He gave up his authority and returned to his farm, content to live in obscurity. His name would echo for millennia, the ideal Roman, the ideal leader. Meanwhile, the Republic's identity continued to evolve. Its armies became disciplined and structured, forming the legendary Manipular legions. Its laws began to crystallize in writing, culminating in the 12 Tables, a public record of Roman law etched into bronze and displayed in the Forum for all to see. No longer would the elite hoard justice in secrecy. The people would know their rights and their limits, but challenges persisted. Rome fought constant wars with neighboring tribes, the Volsci, Sabines, Equi, and Etruscans. In one tale, a nobleman named Gaius Marcius Coriolanus captured the Volscian city of Corioli and was hailed as a hero. But his disdain for the plebeians made him a tyrant in the eyes of the people. When he was exiled, he joined the Volsci and led an army against Rome. Only the tearful pleas of his mother, Veturia, and wife, Volumnia, turned him back from the gates. He withdrew, vanished into obscurity, and his story became a lesson. That Roman identity, rooted in family and duty, was stronger than revenge. As the first century of the Republic neared its end, Rome was no longer just a small city defending its walls. It was becoming an idea, a state built not on bloodlines, but on principles: valor, sacrifice, shared governance, and unyielding discipline. And though many challenges remained, famine, treachery, rebellion, the foundations of the Republic had been laid. From kings cast down to citizens raised high, from a single wooden bridge to the legions that would span the known world, Rome marched forward, unbroken, unyielding, eternal. The crucible of a kingdom in the making. The dawn of the 4th century BCE found Rome standing at a crossroads, no longer just a city clinging to survival, but a young power hungry for more than mere existence. Its ambitions now demanded blood and iron, alliance and conquest. The Republic's legions, sharpened by decades of skirmishes and siege, were eager for the true test that lay beyond the Tiber's banks. First, there was the shadow of the Etruscans, the ancient, sophisticated civilization that had once ruled Rome's kings and whose city-states peppered the hills of central Italy like jewels. Though the monarchy was overthrown, the Etruscans still coveted influence over the region, seeing Rome as a thorn in their sprawling ambitions. But Rome had little choice but to challenge the old masters. War with Veii, one of the wealthiest and most powerful Etruscan cities, broke out around 405 BCE. It was no quick battle but a protracted siege, one that would last nearly a decade, 13 long years of grinding warfare that tested the Republic's resolve as never before. The siege of Veii was more than a military endeavor. It was a political crucible, demanding resources, unity, and sacrifice from Rome's citizens. Farms were left untended. Young men marched year after year into the shadowed forests and fortified walls. But Rome endured because the stakes were clear. Domination of the Tiber Valley meant survival and supremacy. The turning point came in 396 BCE under the consulship of Marcus Furius Camillus, a man later hailed as the second founder of Rome. Camillus devised a bold stratagem. Instead of assaulting the walls head-on, he ordered his engineers to dig a tunnel beneath Veii's fortifications. After weeks of silent toil, Roman soldiers emerged inside the city under cover of night, opening the gates for the waiting legions. Veii fell, its riches plundered, its power broken. The victory was monumental. It marked Rome's emergence as a regional hegemon, a city no longer intimidated by its neighbors but ready to dictate terms. Yet Rome's trials were far from over. Barely a generation passed before a new threat stormed out of the north. The Gauls, these fierce Celtic warriors, wild and unpredictable, had long raided the Italian plains, but in 390 BCE, they descended in force, overwhelming Roman forces at the Battle of the Allia River. The Romans, caught unprepared, were routed with devastating losses. The city itself was vulnerable, its defenses breached, and panic swept the streets as the Gauls encircled Rome. Legend tells of the desperate stand at the Capitoline Hill, where a small band of defenders, led by the famed hero Marcus Manlius Capitolinus, held the last bastion. Manlius's vigilance and courage prevented total destruction, but the city was sacked, its temples burned, and its treasures looted. The trauma of the Gallic sack left deep scars in Rome's psyche, yet it also ignited a fierce determination never to be caught so vulnerable again. Rome rebuilt with urgency and purpose. Its walls were strengthened, its legions reorganized, and its tactics refined. Meanwhile, farther south, Rome's gaze turned to the rugged hills of Samnium, home of the Samnites, a fierce mountain tribe with warriors as tough as the land they defended. The Samnite Wars, spanning from 343 to 290 BCE, were a series of brutal conflicts that tested Rome's endurance and military innovation. The Samnites' knowledge of the terrain and guerrilla tactics initially frustrated Rome's legions, accustomed to open-field battles. Yet the Republic's strength lay not just in its soldiers, but in its ability to adapt. Rome developed the manipular formation, a flexible, segmented military unit that could maneuver through rough landscapes and respond to ambushes with precision. This tactical evolution proved decisive in battles such as the Battle of Synonym in 295 BCE, where Rome crushed a coalition of Samnites, Gauls, and Umbrians threatening the heart of Italy. The victory was monumental. It not only subdued the Samnites, but also secured Roman dominance over central Italy. But war was more than clashing swords and shouted commands. It reshaped Rome's society. The spoils of conquest flooded into the city: land, slaves, and wealth. Veterans, once farmers, found themselves dispossessed as patrician elites claimed fertile fields. The gap between rich and poor widened, sowing seeds of social unrest. Yet even as Rome's power expanded, the Republic clung to its ideals: elected magistrates, codified laws, and the intricate balance of power between Senate and people. The Senate, an assembly of Rome's noble families, grew more influential. It controlled foreign policy, finance, and legislation, guiding Rome's destiny from behind marble columns. But the Republic's expansion was not solely due to military might. That Rome's diplomatic skill was unmatched. It formed a network of alliances. The Socii, with neighboring peoples, who retained some autonomy in exchange for military support and loyalty. This system bound the Italian peninsula in a web of mutual obligation, allowing Rome to project power far beyond its city walls. By the end of the 4th century BC, Rome was transformed. From a modest city-state founded on rebellion, it had become a regional superpower, its armies feared, its politics complex, and its culture vibrant. Its citizens, both patricians and plebeians, were bound by a shared identity forged in countless battles, trials, and sacrifices. Yet the horizon still held distant. Greater challenges. The Republic's next test would come not from Italy's hills or forests, but from across the seas, the island of Sicily and the vast naval powers of Carthage. But for now, Rome stood unbroken, a kingdom not of kings, but of laws, warriors, and a people determined to carve their legacy into the annals of history. From rivals to masters of the Mediterranean as the 3rd century BCE dawned, Rome stood at the threshold of a new epoch, its ambitions stretching far beyond the Italian peninsula. It now faced a rival that matched it in power, wealth, and naval prowess. The great city of Carthage. Founded by Phoenician traders centuries before, Carthage was a thriving maritime empire, its wealthy merchants and formidable fleet dominating the western Mediterranean. Its influence reached across North Africa, southern Spain, and the islands of Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica, territories Rome eyed with growing interest. Conflict was inevitable. The spark that ignited the First Punic War was the island of Sicily, whose fertile plains and strategic harbors were coveted by both powers. In 264 BC, Rome intervened in a dispute on the island, deploying legions to protect allies and challenge Carthaginian authority. What began as a localized conflict rapidly escalated into a full-scale war that would last over 2 decades. Rome was a land power with limited naval experience. Carthage, by contrast, ruled the waves with a powerful fleet. Rome's initial defeats at sea forced it to innovate rapidly. The Republic built a new navy from scratch, designing the corvus, a boarding bridge that allowed Roman soldiers to storm enemy ships and fight hand-to-hand, playing to Rome's strengths in infantry combat. This ingenuity turned the tide. Battles such as Mylae and Ecnomus showcased Rome's growing naval competence and relentless determination. The war dragged on with bloody campaigns across Sicily and the surrounding seas. Cities changed hands, alliances shifted. The cost in lives and treasure was staggering. Finally, after 23 years of bitter struggle, Carthage sued for peace. Rome emerged victorious, claiming Sicily as its first province, a historic expansion beyond the Italian mainland. But this victory sowed seeds of future conflict. Carthage, though battered, retained vast territories and a deep hunger for revenge. The uneasy peace fractured when Rome's expanding interests collided again with Carthaginian ambitions in Spain, where both sought control over valuable silver mines and trade routes. The stage was set for the Second Punic War, a conflict that would test Rome's resilience and shape its destiny forever. This war's greatest drama unfolded with the arrival of Hannibal Barca, Carthage's brilliant and audacious general. His vow to Rome was legendary. "I will face the Romans on their own soil." In 218 BCE, Hannibal embarked on an audacious march from Spain across the Alps into Italy, a feat of unparalleled military daring. Despite brutal losses from cold, hunger, and hostile tribes, he arrived with a seasoned army and war elephants, shocking the Roman Republic. For over a decade, Hannibal waged a devastating campaign on Italian soil, winning battles at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and the infamous Battle of Cannae, where his tactical genius inflicted Rome's worst defeat to date. The Republic seemed on the brink of collapse. Yet Rome's strength lay not only in its legions, but in its spirit. Instead of surrendering, the Senate rallied, refusing peace and continuing the fight. New generals rose to prominence, notably Fabius Maximus, who adopted a cautious strategy of attrition, avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal while cutting off his supplies. Meanwhile, Rome opened new fronts, sending armies to Spain to cut Hannibal's reinforcements and dispatching forces to North Africa to threaten Carthage itself. This strategy culminated in the leadership of Scipio Africanus, a young commander who carried the war to Carthage's doorstep. In 202 BCE, at the Battle of Zama, Scipio's legions defeated Hannibal decisively, ending the Second Punic War. Rome emerged as the unrivaled power in the Western Mediterranean, imposing harsh terms on Carthage, crippling its military, demanding massive indemnities, and asserting dominance over Spain and Sicily. The Third Punic War, decades later, would see Carthage's final destruction, but by then Rome was no longer a republic confined to a single city-state. It was a sprawling empire stretching its influence across seas and continents. The wars against Carthage transformed Rome fundamentally. Its military evolved into a professional force capable of sustained campaigns far from home. Its political institutions grew more complex, balancing the pressures of expansion with governance. Socially, the influx of wealth and slave from conquered territories fueled growth, but also deepened inequalities. Yet despite the internal challenges, Rome's identity as a republic, with its laws and customs, persisted for now. The Punic Wars proved that Rome's destiny was not to be a regional power, but a Mediterranean empire, forged in the crucible of relentless war and bound by a relentless will to dominate. As the dust settled on the battlefields, the Republic looked outward, its ambitions no longer limited by mountains or rivers, but by the vast horizons of the known world. And so began the era of Roman expansion into Greece, the Hellenistic kingdoms, and beyond, chapters of glory and conflict that would echo through history for centuries.